I insist that what it is to be a woman, or indeed what it is to be a man or any other gender, is an open-ended question.
Refugee services.
Trump signed the order last month.
Do you believe in God?
The more I look at the universe, just the less convinced I am.
Of these wildfires sweeping through LA
Can you be more
right
precise
now.
about what's potentially dangerous? You know, write your college paper for you.
It's big trouble. It's very difficult for anybody to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
Well, hi everyone. Kim and I, my wife, have been blessed to stand in some of the most magnificent cathedrals in the world. Like, we walked the ancient stones of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. We gazed upon the towering spires of the Köln Cathedral in Germany. We stood in awe beneath Michelangelo's masterpiece in the Sistine Chapel. We felt the weight of history in St. Peter's Basilica. Listened to our footsteps echo as we walked through Notre Dame in Paris. And each sacred space was designed to draw your eyes upward, to make you feel small in the presence of something holy. The flying buttresses, the soaring columns, the light streaming through the stained glass, all of it evoking wonder and worship. But we saw by far the most breathtaking cathedral we've ever seen last fall on a clear night in northeast Pennsylvania. On that night, the sky itself became a sanctuary. First, a faint yellow glow appeared on the horizon, and then, as if God were unfurling a cosmic tapestry, ribbons of emerald and violet and crimson began to dance across the heavens. It was the northern lights in all their glory. And in that moment, beneath that canopy of light, I felt smaller, and I also felt closer to God than in any cathedral I've ever visited. No architect could design it, no artist could capture it, no choir could match its silent song. The psalmist was right. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. And today, as we talk about our relationship with God's creation, I want us to recover a sense of wonder, not just for these ordinary displays, but for the everyday miracles of the world God has entrusted to our care, because I believe how we treat this world reveals something profound about how we view its creator. God's earth is a wonderful place to live, isn't it? I mean, have you ever stopped to think about the privilege we have of living in such a beautiful environment? And with privileges come responsibilities. And some of you are thinking, oh, wow, I think Derek's about to go green. Like, is he a tree hugger? I can't believe he's getting political like this about this issue. Well, like so many other things, before this was ever a political issue, this was a biblical issue. It goes all the way back to the beginning. Just because an issue has become politicized, that doesn't mean it's primarily political. And like all of these controversial issues that we're covering this month, once it becomes politicized, both sides can easily become corrupted with money and power and influence, and mostly money. And this one's no different. But even though the issue of climate concerns has been taken up by activists and people, throwing paint on the Mona Lisa and laying in a street blocking traffic, and even though there are some people who go way too far by essentially, worshiping the earth or suggesting that plant life is more sacred than human life, this is first a Christian issue. This is our issue. And I fear sometimes as followers of Jesus, we've given it up. But caring for the earth is part of God's original mandate, and it's part of our mission to live out God's story, because part of God's story is the creation and then the restoration of all things. And so today we're going to try to cut through some of the politics and just get back to what the Bible has to say about this issue. Because our culture presents us with two extreme options, and you have to choose one or the other. On the one side, some people dismiss climate science entirely, claiming humans have zero impact on the environment. They argue that since the world is perishing anyway, environmental concerns don't matter to us. The other extreme is kind of a nature worship that places the planet above the people, expressing environmental concerns with apocalyptic hysteria. And both extremes miss God's perspective. As Christians, we're called to a more nuanced, a more biblical approach to creation care. In the middle of it all are the usual profiteers peddling doom and gloom on all sides. The climate end times prophets have the same track record as the Bible end times prophets, 0% accuracy, demonstrating similar hypocrisy as they fly around in private jets lecturing the rest of us on reducing carbon emissions. But there's this ongoing scientific debate, and it's around climate change, especially around global warming. And is this a long-term trajectory that we're on, or is this part of a regular cycle of heating and cooling that the earth goes through? But what seems to have broad agreement is what Hugh Ross calls climate stability versus instability, noting that because of the remarkable stability of the earth's climate over the last 9,000 years, really unlike other very unstable ages in our history, like ice ages and such, that this is what has enabled human civilization to flourish during this time. But regardless of where the science lands, there's a more important question for us as Christians, which is, what does Scripture teach about our relationship to creation? And beyond the scientific considerations, the issue has significant cultural implications, particularly for younger people. Pew Research says 76% of millennials and 74% of Gen Z are concerned or very concerned about climate change. 70% of millennials and Gen Z believe environmental protection should be prioritized over economic growth in our country. Young adults are much more likely than older generations to consider environmental values in their purchasing, in their voting, and their lifestyle choices. And for our purposes today, the general silence of the church on environmental issues has left young people feeling as if Christians maybe are ignoring an issue that's very important to them. And it's actually eroded their trust in the church. And this should concern us deeply. Because as Christians, we have a profound biblical foundation for creation care that could actually lead the conversation, not trail behind it. When we abdicate our God-given responsibility to steward the earth, we not only misrepresent our faith to a watching world, we also miss a critical opportunity to showcase the beauty of God's design for humanity's relationship with creation. And so, what does the Bible teach about our role in the created order? And to answer this, and to help us think Christianly, we need to start where God started. I want to go back to the beginning and look today at Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 26. It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on earth.'" And so God created man in his own image, and in the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them, and God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And so when we examine this passage, we find a profound statement about human identity and purpose in creation. When God says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion," we have to first ask, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? It's deeper than just sharing kind of some character qualities with our Creator. To the first hearers of these words, image and likeness, those terms together, they would have evoked the concept of a statue. In the ancient world, kings would place statues of themselves throughout the distant regions of their empires. They didn't have, political posters to hang up or billboards to display along the road, reminding people that they were the ruler. And so these statues that were created in the image and likeness of the king served as a visible representation of the king's authority in places where the king couldn't physically be. In essence, being made in God's image means that we are God's royal representatives on earth. We are quite literally God's living emblems that make his invisible presence visible and extend his rule throughout creation. Now, this passage talks about our responsibility as God's representatives as it relates to that creation. In fact, in verses 26 and 28, we find these words, rule and subdue and have dominion over. These terms have sometimes been misinterpreted as a license for exploitation, but that misses their biblical context. The Hebrew word for subdue does carry kind of forceful connotations to bring under control or to make suitable for use, but we are also in God's image as representatives, which means while living out these roles, we must reflect God's character. God isn't giving humanity permission to consume or exploit the earth to its detriment. That would contradict his declaration that his creation was very good. However, God seems to also permit us to utilize the earth for human benefit. We're going to come back to some principles here in a moment, but I want to take you to one other text, because while Genesis establishes our role as God's representatives, the New Testament reveals whose creation we're actually stewarding. I want you to look at Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 to 17. It says, "And he, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together." And so this passage deeply impacts our understanding of creation by revealing Jesus's own relationship with this physical world we're in. This passage reveals three crucial dimensions of Christ's relationship to creation. One is Jesus is the creator. He says, by him all things were created. Also, Jesus is the sustainer. In him all things hold together. But maybe most significantly, Jesus is the purpose of creation. It says all things were created through him and for him. It says that he was the firstborn over all creation. That doesn't mean that he was created first. It means rather that creation is his rightful inheritance. The firstborn always got the inheritance. So all of creation belongs to Jesus. And this truth changes everything about our approach to the environment. The natural world isn't neutral territory. It's not merely the backdrop for human activity. It isn't primarily ours to use however we wish. It belongs to Christ. Every mountain, every ocean and forest and creature was made by him and for him. And so for those of us who call ourselves Christians, this should make us deeply concerned about this world that we live in. Like, we can't claim to love Jesus while being indifferent to what belongs to him. See, how you treat something that belongs to someone you love says volumes about how you truly regard that person. And at the same time, this challenges kind of secular environmentalism too. We can't properly care for the physical world while ignoring the one to whom it belongs. And without this perspective, environmentalism either reduces creation to just utility, like we need the planet healthy for our survival, or it elevates nature itself as something to be worshiped, seeing humanity as primarily a threat. And so this brings me to today's big idea, that if you really want to care about the environment, you need to know Jesus. And if you say you know Jesus, you really need to care about the environment. Because in Christ, you see, we find the strongest possible foundation for environmental stewardship. So now that we understand Jesus' relationship to creation and our role within it, let's explore how this transforms our approach to environmental concerns and ethics. Let's call it thinking Christianly about the environment. With each point, I'm going to finish this sentence. When we recognize that creation belongs to Jesus, here's the first. We remember that we're stewards, not owners. So the starting place for our whole approach to creation is the recognition that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, as Psalm 24 says. We don't own this world. We manage it on behalf of its true owner. So think about how differently you treat borrowed items versus things maybe that you own. And I realize that this is true of most people, not all people. But when you borrow your neighbor's pressure washer or your friend's vacation house, like, you tend to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more attentive. You don't just use it however you want. You consider what the owner would want. And this perspective challenges both secular environmentalism, which can, again, elevate nature as an ultimate concern, and also exploitative capitalism, which reduces creation to, mere resources for consumption. And instead, we're called to recognize that we answer to God for how we manage what belongs to him. God has entrusted creation to us. This doesn't mean that he expects us to just preserve it and leave it exactly how it is. Just like your friend that lets you borrow, his house wants you to use it, wants you to enjoy it, like open the fridge and use the shower and such. But remember, in Genesis, God wanted humanity to be fruitful in creation. And so as Dr. Cornelius Van Dam notes, the divine mandate involves harnessing creation's resources and making the most of its potential while being careful to use the resources wisely. It is telling that although the world began with a garden, it will end with a great and beautiful city. I love that. God is anticipating that progress will be made in his creation and that the development of the earth will happen. But we're not the owners. We're the stewards and caretakers of a creation that belongs to Jesus. Now, understanding our role as stewards helps us approach creation with responsibility. But we must also balance this with a proper understanding of humanity's unique place in creation. And so the second way we can think Christianly is that we value all creation while honoring humanity's primary place in it. It's become kind of popular these days to portray humans as almost like intruders in creation, like a cancer that must be regulated or even eliminated for the good of the planet. This sentiment is anti-biblical. The Bible describes humanity as the pinnacle of God's creation and the apple of God's eye. Do you remember the creative process God used with people? It was different than anything else that he formed with his hands. Only with humans did he form them and then breathe on them and make them alive. He didn't do this with the animals. He didn't do this even with the angels. Think about breathing on someone. It implies intimacy. If you're close enough to feel somebody's breath on your face, chances are you're married to them or you're about to be. This intimate relationship is used only to describe God with humanity and creation. So you and I are not just another animal. You and I are not just somehow, one with creation, as Eastern religions would say, blended all together. No, you are uniquely a part of creation, but you are also over it, representing God and his ways in it. You and everyone you have ever met have worth and value in the Imago Dei on a scale that you could never imagine. Like when you look in the mirror, in those moments when you feel worthless or you think no one loves you because you aren't good looking enough or whatever, you don't have, nice enough clothes, you don't have enough friends or whatever, you don't feel like you have anything to offer the world. Like you can know that that's a lie because you are God's. You have worth from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet. Your life and all human life is sacred and precious to God. Jesus would reinforce this hierarchy of creation in some overt ways and in some subtle ways. I've always found his how much more statements to be interesting here. So in Matthew 12, he's talking about healing on the Sabbath. He's being confronted and he gives this illustration. He says, if you had a sheep and that sheep fell in a pit on the Sabbath, like you'd rescue the sheep. And then he says this, how much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Or in Matthew 6, he points to God's care for the birds of the air and then the lilies of the field. You probably know the text. And then he says, how much more does he value you than birds and lilies? What's he doing? He's not putting down plants and animals. They were created by him and for him too, remember? What he's doing is he's establishing the special place in creation that mankind holds. And so yes, a hierarchy exists in the created order. God, the sovereign creator, presides over all. And then humanity, the image bearers of God, they're below God, but above the rest of creation. And then the non-human creation, although inherently valuable in the sight of God and man, comes next in the hierarchy. And so these groups, that are out there suggesting that, that we reduce the population or that we euthanize old people before their date of death, or we tell people not to have babies anymore, or we abort more babies because the planet can't handle it. These ideas violate the heart of God and the Christian view that humanity is the pinnacle of God's creation. The third thing that happens when we recognize that creation belongs to Jesus is that we balance dominion with care. The creation account that we read in Genesis, it presents these two complementary commands regarding creation. We saw in Genesis 1:28 the call to subdue the earth, to have dominion over it. But then in the next chapter, Genesis 2:15, humanity is instructed to work it and keep it. Other translations say to take care of it or to tend it or to even serve the garden. The idea is to watch over it. It's this word throughout the Old Testament that refers to a variety of activities, but it always comes down to exercising great care over something. So a shepherd watches over or cares for a flock of sheep. He's exercising care. A watchman looks over a city, watching for the first sign of an enemy attack. That's what God has asked us to do with his creation. And this balance, it isn't contradictory, it's complementary, like how good parents both, guide their children and nurture them. How responsible leaders make decisions and serve those that they lead. We're called to both develop creation and preserve it, which means we must always seek a balance with things like technology and restraint and development of new things and conservation and meeting human needs and protecting ecosystem health. This requires great humility and wisdom. And since the fall, our stewardship of the earth is imperfect, which is why we must be continually aware of our impact on the earth, but also in trying to intervene in areas where we don't belong. Like maybe you've seen the recent news stories about bringing back certain species by recreating them through DNA samples, the dire wolf and the mammoth. And I'm hearing these stories and thinking, I watched Jurassic Park. Like I feel like I know how this turns out in the end. Maybe we're overstepping our dominion a little bit. But this balanced approach of dominion and care, it isn't just about proper management of creation. It's ultimately an expression of something much deeper. It's the fourth response I want you to see. It's that we steward the creation as an act of love and worship. Jesus taught that loving God and loving our neighbors are the two great commandments. And being good stewards of God's creation, like that embodies both of these commandments. It's both vertical worship and it's horizontal love. A couple years ago, Kim and I bought a piece of art, a painting from Grace's own M. Chrisman out of Grace Harborcreek. And the blue of the painting carries such a depth and worship, and we value this piece of art, not just for its inherent beauty, though it is inherently beautiful, but because we also have a fondness for the artist. Similarly, this world is God's masterpiece, signed with his own character, and when we care for what he made, we're honoring the artist. This perspective changes ordinary actions into worship. Planting a garden becomes partnership with God's creativity. Reducing waste says, I value what you value. But these aren't just acts of worship toward God. They're also acts of love toward our fellow man. When we protect watersheds, for example, we're caring for communities downstream. When we preserve biodiversity, we're protecting the medical discoveries of tomorrow. This love even extends to the future generations who are going to inherit the world that we leave behind. And so when we frame creation care as love of God and neighbor, rather than governmental obligation, it begins to transform our motivations. We're no longer driven by guilt or political pressure. We're driven by devotion to our Creator and compassion for those that he loves. Now listen, this doesn't mean that we support, every Green New Deal or every government program without some discernment. We said last week with immigration, there's a difference between biblical principles and government policies. And we have to parse that out very wisely and keep an eye for corruption and competing interests. But when we steward creation as worship, we're also participating in something far greater than just preserving resources for the next generation. Here's the fifth. We are motivated to join in God's restoration story. So Romans 8:21 tells us that soon creation itself, it says, will be liberated from its bondage to decay. That creation is currently groaning and awaiting redemption, just like we are. And remarkably, God invites us to participate in this restoration story. Not only are we called to repair broken systems and serve the poor and generally make wrong things right, like we talked about last week, but that restorative work also includes caring for this planet, leading the way in partnering with God in his work to make all things new. And through these actions, we bear witness to a greater hope. That the same God who is reconciling all people to himself through Christ is also working to reconcile all things in heaven and on earth. And we recognize that both unchecked consumption and anti-human environmentalism distort God's design. So I pray that these biblical principles can center us on what is true and good and help us to avoid the extreme positions on this issue. So to those who think that, California is going to drop into the ocean unless we all use paper straws. And for those who think all climate science is a hoax that was made up by Al Gore in the 90s, to both of those people, I want to bring us back to a solid scriptural foundation. We don't need to have our hair on fire, and we also don't need to have our heads in the sand. Let's think Christianly. By the way, just a reminder as we seek to live out one of Grace's core values that says we invite conversation. I want to remind you about a framework that I introduced last week called Me, You, It. This is an attempt to get better at talking about these kinds of controversial issues in a very divisive time. So the me, you, it setup starts by just establishing some boundaries before you get into a conversation. So you want to say something like, listen, I value you as a person made in God's image, and your worth as a child of God is not up for debate, and I hope you will grant the same for me. So this is me, and this is you, and the issue that we're discussing, in this case, environmental ethics, is it. You are not your opinion about it, and I am not my preference about it. So you and I can passionately debate it while still respecting each other as fellow image bearers of God. And no matter how strongly we disagree about it, it doesn't undermine your value as a person or mine. And this framework creates space for meaningful dialogue, even on emotionally charged topics like the environment. But dialogue alone isn't enough. Our faith must be lived out in practical action. And so as followers of Jesus, what does creation care look like in our daily lives? For your next step this week, can I encourage you to just do a quick audit on your, let's call it creation stewardship habits. Take a look maybe at 4 simple areas. Look at food waste, like track what you throw away and adjust your shopping and meal planning accordingly. Second, look at new purchases. Like before buying something new, would you ask if you already have something similar, could you borrow that thing or do you really need it at all? Third is transportation. Like what would it look like to combine trips to reduce driving time and fuel usage? And could you walk or bike as the weather warms up? Here's the fourth. It's creation appreciation. How much time are you spending with friends or maybe some family, especially as the weather gets nicer, enjoying outdoor activities in your yard or in some parks or the woods or the beach or a sunset? See, what we appreciate, we tend to protect. Now, each week we want to highlight a character quality of God that relates to the subject matter at hand. And so in week 1, on the battle for our mind, we said God's sovereignty is an unshakable foundation. And in week 2 on immigration, we said God's justice is a refuge for the vulnerable. And today, this one's easy. The unchanging quality of God's character is God is creator. And let me say it this way. God's creativity is the blueprint for abundant living. Now, you may recognize some famous first lines from classic books. Anybody recognize this one? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That's Tale of Two Cities. How about this one? Call me Ishmael. That's the first line from Moby Dick. What about this one? All children except one grew up. That's Peter Pan. And our Holy Bible also, the best-selling book of all time, also has a famous line at the beginning. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Our God is a creator from the beginning, and he did so with purpose and care and with intentionality. And when we truly grasp the innovation and the artistry that God poured into creation, how can we not fall on our knees in worship? Like the myth that God is dull or boring crumbles in the face of his creative genius. Just look around, look at the mountains, look at the valleys, look at the rivers and the oceans. He invented light and color. He invented music and fragrances. His creativity explodes in diversity. There are 350,000 species of beetles. There are 230,000 species of flowers. There are creatures ranging from the bumblebee bat that weighs about 2 ounces and can sit on your fingertip to the majestic blue whale that weighs 190 tons and is 3 school buses long. God created subatomic particles too small to see and galaxies too vast to comprehend. God's creativity knows no bounds. And most remarkable of all, that much of this creation exists solely for his own enjoyment. It's hidden in the depths of the oceans and the far corners of space that we may never discover in all eternity. And yet, this entire cosmic masterpiece operates with the precision of dancers in a divine ballet. See, in creation, God's creativity caused him to turn darkness into light. You remember this in Genesis 1? And then he turned chaos into order. And then he turned empty years into full seasons. And then he turned lack and void into abundance. And then he turned loneliness into love. Now, how many artists do you know that do one project and stop? No. And an artist has the need to continually create. And so we're forced to ask, well, since the world and all the universe has already been made, what is God's current creative project? Well, he actually has 2 creative outlets these days. They are, first of all, the new heavens and the new earth. Jesus said that's being prepared for us even now. But the other creative outlet is people. You feel it, don't you? That longing for beauty and meaning when your world feels empty. The hunger for something more, something transcendent than more than your daily routines. That desire to be part of something greater than yourself. Like you may say, well, I don't see God using that kind of creativity in my life. Listen, any artist knows that the quality of the work depends on the quality of the materials. And so many of us are like hardened clay, like we've become difficult for God to mold and shape because we're hardened. We've gone through the furnace and the fires of life, and instead of being like metal that comes out moldable and pliable, we come out like hardened clay. And this is where, yet again, God's creativity shines brightest because his specialty is transformation. And so just like he did in Genesis 1 at the beginning, he's still turning darkness into light. Anybody walking through darkness? He's still turning chaos into order. Anybody have chaos? He's still turning emptiness into abundance and loneliness into love. The same God who breathes stars into existence can breathe new life into your circumstances. And so as we care for this earth, his canvas, let's also surrender ourselves as his masterpieces in progress. What is he creating in you? What is he creating around you every day? I love you guys.